All right, so we'll be talking about the introduction to depression in the digital age. Really, what we're noticing here is that with the increase in technology and other kind of digital formats, there's been an increase in feelings of loneliness and isolation among people. Why is this? Ultimately, we know that we are social creatures, and while it actually feels good to engage with these types of technologies up front in the beginning, they often do get in the way of how we use our time, and we'll often engage with these technologies or digital applications instead of interacting with other people. So, how does this impact our mental health? One of the things that's really interesting that actually gives us better mental health is to go through some type of kind of healthy struggle. And then through that struggle, we feel a sense of accomplishment or challenge that's been overcome. And sometimes it can be as simple as just getting outside the house when we don't really feel like it. It doesn't have to be the biggest challenge in the world, but there's some type of frustration or challenge that we overcome that makes us ultimately feel better about ourselves. And often these digital technologies remove that struggle, and we just end up engaging with some sort of instant gratification right away. And we don't really get the chance to take on the struggle of the day. And that ultimately makes us feel less positive about ourselves. Unfortunately, too, with this instant gratification, it also creates a feedback loop where we don't really learn how to make ourselves feel better. We don't really have the best coping strategies overall because we just look at our phones right away instead. So this kind of creates a situation where I feel a little bit bored or I feel a little bit irritated. And what do? I just unconsciously reach for my phone and look at it and do something to instantly gratify myself. And that becomes the problem if it happens on a repetitive cycle over time and you don't really teach yourself how to take on these types of challenges without some sort of digital technology. The other thing here that's really interesting is if you just engage with instant gratification right away, you really rob yourself of the opportunity to use that urge to go out and do something that you probably want to do. So as a result, your free time ends up being used towards the technology instead of other things you want to do. So not only do you ultimately lose the coping strategies, but you also don't take on things that you would normally do with your free time anyway. So all this is to say that it's very difficult if you're always engaging with some type of digital technology to go out and socialize because ultimately it's easier to try to satisfy that loneliness feeling by using your phone or your laptop, your computer, or playing a game instead of actually using that sensation of loneliness and using it to motivate yourself or force you to go out and interact with people. Instead, you get the urge satisfied through the digital technology, and that creates the problem over time. So, what is the role of therapy when we're trying to address this digital isolation? Really, one of the main things we try to do is go back and teach people how to identify the feelings that they're experiencing that cause them to go reach for the digital technology right away and help them to relearn the meaning that's associated with it. For example, if you feel bored or irritated and you go towards your phone right away, you're teaching yourself that this urge that I feel is bad or it's something I can't deal with on my own. And that's not necessarily true. In fact, it's not true for most people. So, really, what happens is you're able to learn this urge has a different meaning, and maybe I can react to it differently over time. Practically speaking, sometimes we do very specific things, such as putting a phone or a game in a different room and teaching people to tolerate the frustration of not going and using your phone during a certain period of time. Other times, I'll ask clients to turn their phones or computers into a grayscale version. So they're no longer looking at color on their screens. They're just looking at shades of gray. And you'd be surprised at how less engaging your screen's going to be when you don't get the whole variety of colors there. So there's some practical things that we do to try to work with teaching you how to deal with the uncomfortable feelings that come up in a more helpful way when you don't ultimately get that immediate gratification that can come with these technologies. There's also specific skills within CBT that address how to deal with overcoming depression around loneliness. So the technologies contribute to feelings of loneliness, and often that contributes to symptoms of depression. So one of the most effective ways CBT teaches clients to work with their depression is really to focus on the behavioral side of things. What we know is that if we do something called behavioral activation, getting up and moving towards something, that actually helps with depression symptoms in the mild to moderate range. So daily activity or daily working towards a goal, doesn't have to be the largest goal, but working towards some type of goal is really useful when it comes to overcoming depression. Often we'll start with identifying goals that are on a scale of 1 to 10. What feels like the most challenging? What feels like the least challenging? And break them down the whole way up. And then we'll have clients start with something more in the mild to easier range because you want to get that momentum going. If you start taking on a challenge right away at a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10, it's likely going to be too difficult. And that kind of learned helplessness feeling starts to come in. And then people are less likely to follow through with their goals over time. So to recap, we want to teach people that they're able to take on these feelings of depression by taking a more behavioral approach to it and often break down the goals in a 1 through 10 scenario, then you're much more likely to accomplish these goals over time. Also, building real world connections can really help with digital isolation. Sometimes people are less likely to build these real world connections because they just aren't familiar with socializing, especially with COVID. So I've always found that finding a way to engage with people doing an activity that you think you might like, you're probably not going to be the best at it, but that's okay. Often people develop bonds or friendships through some type of activity. So if you're still in school, finding after school activity. If you're out of school, finding a hobby or intramural sport that you might be interested in and trying to engage with those activities often helps with developing real world connections over time. And then finally, what does digital detox look like when we use a more mindful approach to these technologies? The idea of a digital detox is essentially reducing your screen time to allow yourself a break from the more addictive nature of these technologies, right? I discussed a little bit of these before. When you place your phone in a separate room and you walk away, you want to try to observe what that sensation is like when you want to go engage with your phone again. So being curious about how you feel and really just trying to ask yourself, oh, isn't it interesting that I'm feeling this way? As opposed to being more like, I feel this urge and I have to go get my phone. You want to try to observe and be curious about the sensations. That's a really good mindfulness approach to try to break or increase this digital detox that we can have with technology. How can we seek support and embrace change here around digital detox and the feeling of isolation that comes with this? So obviously, these are really difficult challenges to overcome because we are so used to getting our needs met right away with this instant gratification. So really upfront, the best thing to do is to remember that the attempt in and of itself is the success, right? The outcomes will be there in the future, but simply making the attempt to do some of these strategies should be the thing that you focus on and reward yourself for up front. Otherwise, it's going to probably feel too challenging and too helpless if you just think about what you would like to be without working yourself there. So again, remembering the attempt in and of itself is the success, and then you can go from there.